Governor Brad Little, how are you, sir?
I'm great.
Thank you for coming in today. I know it's a schlep from the Capitol, but you made it out here, and God bless it, man. We're going to talk about Idaho. I'm pumped.
I am too.
There are a couple things that I've been going after for some time, specifically the water issue. That's a huge one. I had my first conversation about this in May or June with TJ Budge, who is representing some of the farmers in this conflict. We have come to a resolution. Is that correct?
Fully signed. All the votes are in. There's an agreement. It's done.
God bless it. Walk me through this. What happened?
Well, I mean, I can go back forever, but the bottom line is Idaho's a pretty dry state, right. And our agriculture, a big part of our agriculture is predicated on diverting water, storing water in snow and in reservoirs, and then the incredible canal system we've got all over the state of Idaho and how we deliver water. The high water mark was like in the late 50s and early 60s. That's when we put in all these canals and it filled up the aquifer, and Thousand Springs at Bliss was really Thousand Springs. Water was just squirting out of the hillside. Since then, we put in a lot of wells, some deep, some deeper. And of course, the potato industry in particular is dependent upon pressurized irrigation, because to grow great Idaho potatoes, you got to really control when and how you put the water on. So the potato industry is expanded under irrigation. Well, as we became more efficient with our water system, cement canals, aluminum pipe, plastic pipe, there's less water going into the aquifer. And we've recognized this for a long, long time. And so there have been multiple different events where we bought out a water right here, bought out a water right there. But there's a recognition by everybody that the aquifer is going down. It's down about a third from what it was at its very high point. Now, nobody expects it to be at our high point because of the way we've changed diversions. Well, as that's happened, the people that have a constitutional protection, they were the first people to have water. If they get less and less because there's more water that's going into the efficiency and the new ground that's been irrigated, they have the legal right to make a request, a call on the junior water rights. That happens, has happened in a cyclical set of years. In 2015, we had an agreement that they were going to basically shave their consumption by about 12 or 13%, and we thought that would stabilize the aquifer. Not everybody did that, but part of the problem with that agreement is if one person was guilty, they were all guilty. So the senior guys made a call on the junior guys. The Idaho Department of Water Resources, which is responsible for administering water rights, said, you guys got to shut off your pumps. That's when everything blew up. But it was following the law. And in fact, the Idaho Supreme Court and the water master says, yes, that's what you have to do. That's what the department has to do. But, and that was pretty draconian. You're talking about hundreds of thousands of acres that was going to have to be dried up. I got involved. I've been involved all along, but I said, look, this is not a good solution that after somebody has spent all the money to put their crop in, after they've contracted their crop, after food processors are counting on potatoes or sugar beets or fill in the blank, that wasn't available. So, and I did a water summit a year ago where we could kind of see this happening. But I cautioned all the players that I said, if we don't solve this in Idaho, we'll have what's happening in Texas, what's happening in Colorado, what's happening in Utah, what's happening in California, where the federal government comes in and intervenes. Water sovereignty is incredibly important to the state of Idaho. So how are we going to fix this? You guys, the two major parties, but there are a lot of kind of other parties, need to get together and figure out a way to where the senior people get their water and the junior people have surety that there's going to be water for them. That's that's the long story to answer your question, and that's where we are. It's kind of in a rolling 4-year thing. There's going to be better measurement. There's going to be better application. We're gonna know more about what's going on. But I am very thankful that they did the hard work. Lieutenant Governor Bedke and Jeff Raybould in particular, Jamie on my staff, the Department of Water Resources, they did a lot of great work, and it makes my heart feel good that my farmers, some of them that were pretty irritated when this happened, all recognize, and I think your podcasts have suggested that they recognize that this is a good resolution to a big problem.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge win. The other thing that I find so impactful about this particular agreement is that everybody I've spoken with has articulated, they're like, listen, this was not, we were told we had to find a solution, but we weren't told what the solution was. It was like, look, put the players in the room, and Dean Stevenson, who was in here, his episode hasn't published yet, but he was talking, he's like, listen, there were a couple times when like this guy would get pulled out into the shed and, read the riot act and have to come back in, and it's like, okay, here we go. And everybody had to come to the table with a resolution in mind. And it was the people that were going to be impacted that found the resolution. It was not a top-down thing. It was a, hey, look, you're the people that are needing this water. You're the people that, everybody's participating in the problem. We all need to participate in the solution. And I thought that was great. It's like, good Lord, man. Like, that's pragmatic, functional governing.
Well, one of the biggest farmers, junior irrigators from the eastern part of the state, recognized what you just said and said, let's get the lawyers out of the room. Let's have the farmers on both sides come to agreement, and then they can clean up the paperwork afterwards. That process has taken quite a bit longer than any of us preferred, but the basic agreement, to Dean Stevenson's point, was that they came to a point where they all agreed this is the right thing to do, and then the lawyers added a bunch of costs to it. And
God bless it, as they tend to. When you mention water sovereignty and the federal government coming in, I have learned about a couple things in Idaho recently that have really blown my mind. One is the Lava Ridge project, which I just did an interview with Dean Diamond on. That'll come out in a couple weeks. It was a fantastic conversation, but it was essentially, hey, look, we have land in the state of Idaho that is not owned by the state of Idaho or residents of Idaho. It is owned by the federal government. That's what the public lands means. And the BLM is the federal entity that manages this land. They can lease it out to people. They can do all kinds of things with it. The Lava Ridge project is one aspect of that. But more than that, like, I hadn't heard about Lava Ridge because I don't live in Jerome, right? And I'm like, wow, this is a wild thing. But what it pushed me back to was, what I do care about? The fact that I had smoker's cough for like 3 months this summer because there were fires everywhere. I was actually in Redfish on Thursday when the fire kicked off up there. And this is a case of federally owned land that is federally managed, mismanaged, that meaningfully affects my life, your life, anybody in breathing distance of this smoke. And it's like, how is this happening? If they own it, they're responsible for managing it. They take our tax dollars and do it, and they mismanage. It's literally like, I let you come over for dinner and you bring your dog, and your dog just goes around my house and like poos and pees everywhere and chews up my couch, and you don't stop your dog. It's like, can you manage your animal, please? Like, you're in my house. And I feel like that's what's happening with our wildfire system. Like, am I on or off? Like, how is this happening in Idaho?
Well, yesterday, the president-elect announced that Doug Burgum's going to be the new Secretary of Interior, and the governor of North Dakota. I've got a great relationship with Doug. He followed me as I followed him as chairman of the Western Governors. These are issues the Western governors, Republican and Democrat, both agree on, is that the federal government needs to be a good partner on whether it's BLM lands, which are the Department of Interior, or Forest Service lands, which are U.S. Department of Agriculture, which is a little bit of a problem because there's one will do one thing and one will do the other. But in the particular instance, Lava Ridge, they made that big proposal, and they kind of gave lip service to local input, but they really didn't take local input. And I know that's what raised the magnitude of that problem to where it was and how big it was. And people were concerned that all that power, we were going to suffer the consequences, whether they be visual, whether they be roads, whether they be dust, whether they be figure out whatever it is, and all the power was going to go out of state. That's what really got people ginned up about it.
Yeah, I mean, look, the Lava Ridge project, again, I just got educated on this, but for people who've never heard of it, you go to Jerome County and you see, all of a sudden, you start seeing windmills like crazy. You're like, wow, that's wild. And there's a roughly a 200,000 section of public land. Dean Diamond's property borders up against it that has been used, and that public land has been used for grazing and all kinds of other things. And the BLM decided, okay, we're going to lease this land out to an energy company. The energy company is going to build the biggest windmills in the history of the world. They're going to be like 700 feet high. They're going to build them all over this area. It will impact immediately the people that have been grazing there, short and long-term impacts. They're also not selling the power to Idaho. So it's like, wait a minute, you're going to come park this thing in Idaho. You don't care that we're saying we don't want it. Like the county commissioners were against it. The property owners were against it. The ranchers that are already leasing out or paying for a portion of that land to graze, everyone's against it. They're like, yeah, that's right. And they're like, and we don't even get the benefit of a lower electrical bill. They're like, nope. It's like, what planet are we living on? Again, I've heard about federal intrusion into states before. And I recognize that that's a thing. I'm like, well, look, I don't really know anything about it. But these two examples, like, this is wild. Like, how is this? Again, it's something that was shocking. Now, it is my understanding, and I don't know if you can make comment on this, but specifically with Lava Ridge, that there is an opportunity perhaps to reverse this with the changing of presidential administration.
Oh, yeah.
Is that correct?
Oh, yeah. Those. It seems like there's always one more EIS process to go through. But I mean, this is, I think the federal government does EIS's environmental impact statements on too many issues. This is one that absolutely required, because it was such a draconian change to the landscape out there.
Right.
And so until the final, and then the record of decision, they'll do an EIS, and the record of decision, there's still time to make a change.
Well, God bless it. I hope it does. And again, back to the wildfire management, right? What's happening? Like, are we lining up for another, several months of this every summer? Is this something that the state of Idaho can look at those managing and say, hey, you got to get this lined up, because we're doing our part with the lands that we manage. If you have to manage this better, because it's meaningfully impacting our citizens in our state.
Well, if you look at the land that the state manages, our state endowment lands, because we manage them, they're roaded. If there's bug kill trees there, we get the bug kill trees. A good example is not too far from here. The tussock moth, which happens on an occasional basis, tussock moth came in and killed all the grand fir. Now, let me just say that that happens on an occasional basis. The state looked at it. We went in and said, A, grand fir is not that merchantable. B, it's not that good for the environment. Let's take out all these dying grand fir, generate some cash off of them, create some jobs, replant that to trees that are going to be more sustainable, more fire resistant in the future. Right next to our state land, the Forest Service did nothing. And when you look at it, you can see all those dead trees there that were died and were a fire hazard. The lava fire, the 100,000 acre lava fire that just burnt, and the snow has finally put it out and we got it contained. But the reason that fire was so big and so hot and grew so fast, because the Forest Service didn't do what we did, what the state did to manage those dead trees. And that's just one example. And it actually was started by Governor Otter in conjunction with the federal government. The federal government doesn't do a good job of managing their timber, and they kind of recognize that. So there's a whole system called Good Neighbor Authority, where the state says, look, we'll come in, we'll work with the federal government, but we will do the analysis, we will cruise the timber, we will sell the timber, we will log it, we'll help restore the ground afterwards on federal land. It used to be the federal government had all the authority, but they recognized they weren't doing it. You talked about Redfish Lake. I have been very critical of the Forest Service because they let all those lodgepole trees die, not necessarily right at but further up in the valley, above or below Stanley. All those lodgepole died. There's a family from Parma that wanted to buy those lodgepole when they were dying, before they were totally dead. The Forest Service wouldn't even entertain his offer. He went over and bought lodgepole in Oregon, and all those trees died. So part of the magnitude of that fire at Stanley, which is the Wapiti fire that came around, was because those trees were all dead there. It's critical salmon habitat. It's critical wildlife habitat. It's one of the most scenic areas of Idaho. But because of the Forest Service lack of management there, it became a big, big deal. And we want to use Good Neighbor Authority to go into those areas, do a better job of managing it, and get rid of that smoke problem that you were talking about this summer. Now, we're not going to get rid of all of it. We got 4 million acres of wilderness area that, it's hard, but it's mostly burned up over the last 30 years, so it's going to be a less problem because they've let it burn for a variety of reasons. But we are very hopeful that the new administration will be able to ramp up Good Neighbor Authority and do more management on federal land.
Can you send them a bill? Like, if you invoke like Good Neighbor Authority, can you be like, hey guys, here's the $50 million it cost us to do this?
Well, of course, my good friend Governor Gianforte in Montana has demanded that a forest supervisor be replaced and step down, and a lot of it's over the cost share. We were Montana was the last, but we have an agreement with the federal government about how we pay for fires. And obviously on state ground, in most areas, we're responsible. On Forest Service ground, in most areas, they're responsible. But there's a lot of areas where there's cross-jurisdiction. There's federal land mixed with state ground and private ground. And so we came to an agreement there. But the problem is, if the Forest Service lets their fires start and burn, and then they send me a bill for suppressing fire on state land when they let it start and get going, that is where we're thinking about sending them a bill. Now, if they suppress it like we do, initial attack and suppress it, that's a totally different thing. So that is an ongoing conversation that we will have with the Forest Service. And, the federal government just writes a blank check because they print money to fight fire. The poor taxpayers of Idaho have to front load it and pay for it. We burn up, literally, we burn up about $50-some million this year. We're going to have to take $50 million of taxpayers' money to replenish that, which I understand it. But if that number gets to be really high because the Forest Service isn't doing their job, I'll send them a bill, but I don't know that they'll pay it.
Yeah, right. Hey, listen, sometimes it's just the principle. It's just like, hey, buddy, you're picking up this one. There's an issue that has really jumped into sharp relief across the country recently with athletics that is very near and dear to my heart. I was a college athlete. My wife was a college athlete. She played water polo at Cal. And, having Riley Gaines come here and talk about her experience, it really blew my mind. It was like, how has our country come to this point? Right. And what was very frustrating in Riley's story, one of 100 things about it, is that this young woman was up there fighting for herself. It was like, where were the coaches? Where were the assistant coaches? Like, they should have stormed the pool and been like, this is a farce. Like, we're not letting this person compete. And at least that's my opinion. And when you look at D1 athletics, it becomes very clear that there are very few coaching positions, and those things are very, very coveted. And because of that, I personally know D1 coaches that are kind of like, well, these are the rules. But seeing that she was not surrounded by the leaders in the room saying, hey, this is wrong. Like, Riley's standing up for herself, but she's the wrong person to be standing up for her. We should be standing up for her. You were the first governor in the country to sign a bill that outlawed intermixing of genders in sports with transgenders in female sports. Obviously I can understand why you did that, but you were the first out of the country. Why did you feel so strongly?
Well, I just thought it was a fairness issue. I remember when Title IX was put in years and years ago, and how it changed literally the world. How it, all of a sudden, young women had a place to go when they were in high school, when they were in college, and it equalized the funding. And there was a lot of complaints about it. Oh, it's costing the high school more, the college more. But you look at all the good that's been a result of basically our act was called Fairness in Women's Sports. Title IX was Fairness in Women's Sports. It's just a natural progression from what we did to support and have Title IX. People talk about of course we did that. It's like, it should not be ground shaking that the people of Idaho all collectively believe it's unfair for somebody with a genetic and a physiological advantage gets to unfairly compete against women. It's like, of course we did that.
Like, it shouldn't be that profound. But
No.
Here you are, like, somebody had to be the first, and Idaho was it. And understanding that, I was like, God bless it, man. Like, this is a state that I have moved to that has welcomed me, and I love it here. And it's so mind-boggling to me that it's like, why is it the things that seem so common sense here are so controversial? I don't have the answer. I doubt that you do as well, but we're taking steps in that direction.
Well, I think higher education, and matter of fact, I had a discussion with one of the other agencies about that today. Higher education has over the years become kind of an aloof ivory tower institution where they think they know better. And I understand where they're coming from, but they got to realize they're overdriving their headlights. That does not reflect America. That particularly does not reflect Idaho, and the fact that we want that fundamental fairness. That what they think they're doing to feel good about something is just shouts in the face of common sense and what people want to have done. So, and the State Board of Education has said we're not going to allow institutions to hire using DEI. There's going to be a DEI test. We want to educate Idaho students. We want to provide a service for the people of Idaho. And some of this wokeness that I think migrates out of the bigger institutions, the Ivy League institutions on the East Coast, and they come from the East Coast and the West Coast, and we in the middle kind of end up with the leftovers when they come into our states. We got to say, no, we're not going to do that. And that's what's taking place.
Man, God bless that. Can I ask you a question, just person to person, instead of like governor to random guy?
Okay.
How do I help this state? Okay. And what I really mean by that is I moved here less than 3 years ago. The only thing I knew about this is that my friend Mike moved here, and I came to this state for 48 hours the week before Thanksgiving in 2021. I bought a house. I flew home, and 6 weeks later we were in the car. So I left my family. My wife left her family. We took our 3 kids. We moved up here. And as embarrassing as this is, for the first year, I reported back home that, oh my gosh, Idaho is the best. Idaho is incredible. I was telling anybody who would listen. But in reality, all I did is hang out on my street and drink beers with dudes who moved in too from other states. Like, none of us knew what Idaho was. And we were just like, oh my God, Idaho is the best. Now, look, I was right, but I was right for the wrong reasons. Because the more I've learned about the state, the more I've realized, like, wow, this place is different. It's different. And I'm barely scratching the surface understanding what this place is and who the people are. And the last thing I want to become is another person who's moved from out of state, who all of a sudden takes up the mantle, like, I need to save Idaho from itself, right? Because again, I do this every day. I still don't understand what Idaho is. And like, where do I exactly help? but I want to. And I recognize that I'm new here and your state has welcomed me. And there are a lot of people like me that I think want to help. So like, just looking at me, like, how do I help without becoming that person who patronizingly tells you, like, I want to save you from yourself? Because I don't want to be that guy. I'm not that guy and I don't want to be him. Help me understand this.
Well, those, I'm very, very blessed, Teresa and I, that our families have been here for generations. And Idaho's always changed. I mean, Idaho was started off as very agrarian, mining, timber, agriculture, food processing. And, there were, as there were everywhere else, there were no technology jobs. But it's been such a robust, first off, the work ethic that exists here, that new industries have found a home here. When HP put their plant in out on Chinden Boulevard, that was the technology. And then when those two brothers from Blackfoot, Idaho started Micron in a garage or a basement, I can't remember which one it is. Seems like most businesses start in a garage or a basement. Since we're sitting in the garage, I think that's appropriate. But it reflects, Idaho's keen interest in change, but we want to harken back to those values that have been here forever, which is hard work, love of your neighbor, independence, obviously capitalism, because every one of those businesses were dependent upon capitalism. Most of the people migrating here, I call them cows, California, Oregon, and Washington, come because of the governance there that has been, I often say that Gavin Newsom's a Realtor of the Year in Idaho.
I made a clip on that. I made that joke in 22. I will send you the Instagram reel. It was fantastic. Anyway, I'm sorry. Yeah.
But and people always ask me, says, Governor, you're leading the fastest growing state with the highest increasing incomes. Says, what do you do? And I says, I'm not Gavin Newsom. I'm not Kate Brown. And I'm not Gavin. And I'm not Jay Inslee. The governors and the legislators and the local leaders in those states have fostered an environment to where people come here. I joked one time, I think it was in Portland, I says, no wonder everybody from Portland's moving to Idaho. Look at what it's like on the streets. I says, we got to get some mannequins out and have fake homeless people so people don't move to Idaho, because we've got, they come here and don't see any homeless people and everybody wants to move to Idaho. And it's, if Idaho retains what we had in the past and continues to modernize. And for me, my number one thing when I got this job, when I hired my staff, was I had been lieutenant governor when we went through the last recession. We had 10% unemployment. We had 100,000 people out of work. And the worst thing of all is our kids were leaving Idaho. People would tell me with tears in their eyes that their son or daughter, when they got out of high school, when they got out of college, was going to go somewhere else. I said, if I just have one lens to where everything I do is to make it to where Idaho kids will select to stay here in Idaho, whether it's education, whether it's regulation, whether it's health care, whether it's what we do to protect the great outdoors, Idaho will continue to foster. And that's what we've done. We've gotten so good at keeping Idaho kids that now everybody else's kids want to move here also. Oh,
1,000. Listen, my dad adopted 7 after me. They're all moving here. There's like, I moved here, then he moved here. I have two of my youngest adopted sisters are in high school here. Like it's a great place. So look, man, you kind of brought this on yourself. Like you did. I moved here. It's at least in part your fault. Governor, I really appreciate you coming in. I know time is limited today. I know it's a work day. You carved time out to come and talk to me. I really appreciate it. Is there anything you'd like to say here at the end?
No, I appreciate it very much. And your in-depth work on the water issue is just one example of what we need in Idaho for people to understand. It's, to have this long of a shutdown, of a sit down and a conversation is incredibly important to where people from different sources can look at some of the issues that have been facing Idaho, the good and the bad both. You know, there's nothing wrong with talking about, and maybe if you talk about more bad things, fewer people will move to Idaho. So,
oh my God.
No, we like I said, through that one lens, if all the decisions we make is to whether you've been here for multi-generations or you've just moved here, that your kids will decide they want to stay in Idaho, that's the best possible thing we can have.
Yeah, well, I'm very hopeful that they do. Thank you for what you're doing for Idaho. Hopefully we can keep the conversation going.
All right. Thank you.